Teachers and professors of Reddit, what's the best answer you've gotten on an exam that wasn't technically wrong? On a maths paper with the question, Tom and Dave play a game with a 6-sided spinner. Tom spins the spinner 200 times. These are the results: 130, 232, 359, 431, 528, 620. Is this fair? He replied no, he didn't let Dave have a go. Tutor. Early primary school biology test. What is a name for a male cow? Answer: Bruce. Question: what changes could you implement to make the heating device more efficient at increasing the temperature of the water? Answer: heat the water during the day so the warmth from the sun also contributes to heating the water. Year 4 Maths. Last question on first page. Circle the odd numbers. Kid also circle the page number below the list of numbers. Extra point awarded. Chemistry test. Why shouldn't you smoke at a petrol station? You might get cancer. English teacher in Japan. The students were to finish the sentence "I can't stand," and someone wrote "I can't stand on water." My college anatomy professor once asked on an exam which muscle turns the head. The answer he was looking for was sternocleidomastoid, but one student answered gluteus maximus. My professor says he thought about it for a bit, laughed out loud at his desk, and gave the student full credit. High school English teacher. I asked the kids to do a presentation on how life will be different 100 years from now. Most students talked about flying cars and such, that there would be an apocalypse maybe, or even world peace. Except for these two boys. They had a slideshow of the galaxy, and were just talking about sizes. Sizes like this is how big the known galaxy is, and they continued zooming out, until Earth was a tiny speck. The whole class and myself were confused as to why they were showing how big the universe and different clusters of stars were until the end, when the one kid said, "And so you can see, in 100 years, what happens on Earth doesn't actually matter a single bit." My friend is an English teacher, and the class, 16-year-olds, had just finished reading Of Mice and Men. He poses this. The answer is curly. What is the question? So he's looking for something like who attacks Lenny, or who is the boss's son. Anything where the answer is curly. One kid puts his hand up, brain working furiously, and says, "Is it? Who is curly?" I work with kids. Part of my job is best described as tutoring, and I work with two kids at once. One of the children had to write sentences on what he enjoys doing that does not involve electronics. I was trying to help him think of things to help him, going for a walk, reading a book, playing ball, drawing, and so on. At one point I asked his partner, who is 5, if he had any ideas. He responded with, "I like wearing a shirt." When my dad took general chemistry in college, the class was incredibly full, so his lab section ended up being taught in a humanities building across campus that didn't have things like emergency showers. The first day, they got a lecture about lab safety and were assigned to write up what you would do if your classmate spilled acid on himself. My dad, being a smart ass, instead wrote up what he would actually have to do. First, haul the screaming victim down to the campus bus stop, wait calmly for the shuttle to the science quad, try to quiet the victim so that he does not alarm other passengers, etc. My physics teacher once showed me a few of his favorite answers. One time he had a test asking something like, "Your city planner, in charge of designing roads. Concrete has a friction coefficient of 1.0 when dry, and 0.5 when wet. Asphalt has a friction coefficient of 0.75 when dry, and 0.6 when wet. What should you make roads out of?" He was looking for asphalt because it's more dangerous when it's wet out, thus giving you better control in dangerous situations. Or concrete because it's better when dry, and most of the time dry conditions are present. Some guy just wrote asphalt because it's cheaper. The reason he was showing me some of these is because on day 1, his first lesson to us was that speed is relative. He held a tennis ball up and said anyone who can guess how fast this is moving gets a candy bar or whatever. We all guessed 0 because it wasn't moving. He then explained to us that no matter what answer we gave, we were wrong because to an observer not on Earth, it's moving 500 miles per hour due to the rotation of Earth. zoom out even further and it's moving even faster due to Earth's orbit, etc etc. So on the first test he asked us to show our work on a math problem and I added 500 miles per hour on every velocity depending on if it was going east or west, thus vastly overcomplicating the problem but getting the right answer, and making it a pain in the butt to grade. He said he'd give me 100% if he could keep the exam and if I never did it again. For chemistry, how do you prevent an iron fence from oxidizing? My answer, send it to space. Full points. Student here. When I was in high school, for biology we dissected a fetal pig. On the test we had afterwards one of the questions was something like why do the lungs not function properly and I simply wrote it's dead. Got the mark. Not a teacher, but on a programming test in college, the question asked us to print a pattern like 1, 10, 101, 1010, 10,101. Now what they wanted us to do was to write a loop for it, but they didn't specify that. I was running out of time, so instead of writing out the proper code for it, I just wrote print statements for the 5 lines. Got full credit for it too. Had to take my second year of biomedicine uni exams while on chemo and had a bad chest infection. The painkillers they gave me were awesome. I was high as a kite. I was doing the human anatomy paper and there was a question about digestion and I wrote a story about how someone ate some cake and its adventure through their body until it finally reached a crappy end. One question asked us to describe a cancer treatment and its effects on the body, so I went into great detail about my last chemo session, the hour-long wait for treatment, the sickly yellow of the ward, how much I would vomit if they gave me the wrong anti-sickness tablet, the ways the drugs were administered and how much it freaking hurt my veins, how and why my wee would be red afterwards, how old people would talk at me, telling me I shouldn't have cancer, during treatment at the ward. Somehow I knew all the drug names and what they did and then went through the day by day of the 14 days of side effects between treatments and the long-term effects too. Ended it off with something about chemo sucks major boss and I'm all bald now, would not repeat. Then I drew hedgehogs for the rest of the time. I have no idea what the person marking it must have thought, but it was the only exam I passed that week. Not an exam, but still pretty good. I was teaching my high school ESL English as a second language class about compound words. They started doing an activity, and one student, frustrated with his friend, shouted "You freaking butthole." I whipped around and told him to watch his language. But, miss, butthole is a compound word. One of my colleagues was marking essays today from a second year university course. 2 gems. One student was differentiating efficiency and effectiveness. They started with, despite the fact both words begin with E. Another had to respond to some crappy quote about culture eating strategy for breakfast. They said that to begin they needed to define the key terms. First they defined culture. Fair enough. Then they defined strategy. Fair enough. And then they defined breakfast. Was testing EMT students, running a medical scenario. Student said I'd give him an EpiPen. I asked for the dose and he pauses, looks right at me and goes, 1 pen. I laughed and said he's not wrong but he could be more right. He didn't know the dose. He repeated the scenario the next day. Not me, but a friend. She gave an essay type exam to 4th graders regarding bees and environment. The question was, what would be the impact if bees would go extinct? A student wrote if bees would go extinct, if teacher asks us to bring a bee to school we wouldn't be able to bring one. Design exam in an engineering course. Kids had to analyze a hairdryer design, i.e., wattage, airflow, etc. Final part: what is wrong with this design? I think it was something like the elements are laid out in totally the wrong angle and efficiency is frick because of it. The best answer was it doesn't have enough power. It needs more power, because more is more. The exam asked for a ray diagram. My classmates drew a labeled stingray. Student here, but on a hydrogeology exam, we had to write a short essay on why is liquefaction a problem? I put, because, in general, buildings are not designed to float. I got full credit. On an essay about the factors that led to World War I had one student that wrote that alliances were formed between nations so they could be douche canoes to each other without having to worry about being ganged up on. He wasn't wrong, but I had to mark him down a little for using casual language in a formal essay. but that's the technical term. Student teaching and was finishing up the World War II unit with a test. One of the final questions was about Japanese internment camps and asked if the Japanese Americans ever received reparations and if so, what were they? The answer in yes. In the late 80s, surviving victims received $20,000. While the students were taking their tests, one asked me, Mr. K, what are reparations? I was a little busy with other questions, so I said like payback. The student nods and starts writing. Next week I was grading these and got A's. For his answer, he wrote, the Japanese did receive reparations in the form of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I laughed but realized this was mostly my fault and gave him partial credit and an explanation after class the next day. In an intro biolab quiz, I asked my students to define bilateral symmetry. One student simply drew an arrow and wrote C reverse. On the back of the quiz was an extremely ornate and intricate drawing of Chewbacca, 10/10 quality. Running down the middle of Chewbacca was a dotted line. Full points. In a class that was trying to teach future teachers how to write a test, we were given a test that was so poorly written that instead of answering the questions, I corrected it and turned it. One of my proudest smartass moments where I played it off to the instructor as I thought that is what you wanted us to do with this. Can I submit my own answer? Organic chemistry. Question was how many different configurations are there for a particular molecule? The question said, list all 7, but I could only come up with 6. I figured, I'm gonna lose a point anyway, may as well be entertaining. So I wrote it's a trap and doodled a crappy little Admiral Akbar. Turns out, it was a trick. There were only 6 conformers and I was the only one who got it right. On an religious education exam, a student just put it is God's will on all the answers. Geology test, is this a rock or a mineral? My answer, yes. Got full credit and didn't even realize I had misread the question until I got the test back. I'm a teacher, but this story comes from my student days. Back in high school, we had Scholastic Bowl, where teams would compete by answering questions in various categories. One time for our final question we got, what star is the closest to the Earth? Another team buzzes in and says, Alpha Centauri, and the moderator says it correct and they start celebrating their win. Our team objects, and simply state, it's the sun. The other team all face palms. The moderator excuses himself to go check with the director. He looked very sheepish when he came back and gave us our game-winning points. In 4th grade math we had a question asking us to find how big, in area, a door was needed to fit in a frame of dimensions x by y inches. I did x times y, and then subtracted off some area on each side so the door could actually open. Had to explain it to the teacher, got credit, and now I'm an engineer. When I was in 6th grade in Catholic school we had to research what our last name meant and write a paper on it. Turns out mine meant, the Queen of Heck or Gate to the River Styx depending on how you look at it. I showed the teacher and she excused me and let me skip the assignment. Statistics test said you roll a die. What are the chances a 1, 2, or 3 are rolled? I put it depends how many sides the die has, and then I put the percentage for 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 20-sided dice. I got 0 points because too many incorrect answers. Dice only have 6 sides. I even petitioned it and lost. Frick my school. My wife is an elementary school teacher and she actually has a Word document of her favorite answers to test and homework questions. One that stands out the most to me was an answer to a homework question. The kids were practicing their 2's times tables and the question said something along the lines of, John lives in his house with his mom, dad, brother, and grandpa. How many total hands do the people in John's house have altogether? The answer they were looking for was 10 and they wanted the students to show that to 5 equals 10. This young man instead wrote, not enough information. We don't know if anyone in the family lost a hand. He wasn't wrong. My wife just wrote, good thinking on his assignment and gave him full credit. The kid was bright and knew his times tables, so that wasn't an issue. He just wanted to think outside the box. Teacher said, what's the most number of equal slices you can get from a pizza making 3 cuts? Most people said 6. My friend said 8. Teacher said, please explain how you got that. Buddy said, cut it in quarters, then turn the knife on its side and carefully cut under the cheese and sauce, but above the bottom of these crust. 8 equal pieces. She gave him the points and then changed the question from the non. Not a teacher, was student. Statistics lesson. Teacher shows slides showing scatter graphs representing the size of the items coming off a production line compared to the expected size. We were asked to suggest what should be done about each one. For example, if most of the items are too large, we had to suggest that the machine be adjusted to reduce the size. Finally comes a graph where the results are absolutely all over the place. My suggestion that the operator be fired and forced to become a statistics teacher was not well received by the teacher, who it turned out, had previously been let go from a factory job. He did actually ask for me to be expelled. My head of year apparently laughs in his face. Not a teacher, but we had to give a speech in English class about anything we wanted for 3 minutes as part of our exam. I completely forgot to do it and ended up doing a speech on how to do a speech without preparing for it. My teacher thought it was funny and I ended up getting full marks. Obligatory not a teacher. When I was a student, for my Mandarin exams we had to use phrases to form sentences. Didn't really know what the phrase meant, so I wrote as my answer I'm asked to use phrase to write a sentence, but I don't know what it means. It was marked correctly initially, but a classmate saw it and raised it to the teacher. My teacher smiled and crossed the mark off, comma. Recent one. A 5th grader brought a reading quiz on a class novel to me with answers circled but no other work. I insist they give some kind of rationale for their choices, and they're used to this expectation. So I asked, where's your text evidence? The kid pointed to the book and said, it's in there, indignantly. I had to laugh because he wasn't really wrong. He didn't understand why it was funny. College level math. Probability. The question described a game of chance, and the payoffs for each outcome. Then it asked what is the fair price you would charge your friend to play this game. The student worked out carefully that the friend would win, on average, $1.20 per game. So he wrote, therefore, the fair price I would charge my friend to play the game is $2, because I want to make a profit. I teach undergrad intro to computer security course at a local university. I had a question that was something along the lines of name 3 types of people you would want on your computer incident response team. The best answer I received was an Asian, someone with a car, someone over 21. There was a kid in my class once who put God loves us over and over again on a sheet of paper in lieu of an essay. The teacher gave him a 78 because this is the greatest truth known to man. Private Catholic school. Not a teacher here, but in a literature class he had to take at college, there was a bonus question which stated draw a picture of Shakespeare. My brother wrote we do not know what Shakespeare looks like, so here's a picture of a duck with a mustache. He proceeded to draw the duck and he received full credit for that question.